Welcome to Life Change Solutions, a podcast dedicated to lifting spirits and lightening loads for hope, health, and happiness as we go through change. I'm your host, Kendra Crompton, and I'm so excited for our podcast today because it's something that really touches my heart in such a way that I feel so passionate that it needs to get out there. There are many changes that we go through in life. Some of them are more difficult than others. One of them is that of addiction. Changing from active addiction into recovery is one of the most difficult things I've seen people do. Today, I have a guest who has done just that. Not only has he done that, he is now helping many others do that through his podcast, By All Means Necessary. I'd like to introduce you to Marco Murillo. Marco, I am so thankful that you're on my podcast today. I'm honored to have you because it's very few people that are a success at this recovery and then go on to help others. And your podcast, I've listened to some of the episodes, is inspiring to hear those people's stories because those stories will change other people's lives, may just touch someone's life in such a way that they can have hope and be inspired and motivated to make that change. Sometimes it's just one word or someone's story that can help somebody else. So today we get to hear your story, and I'm so excited to hear that. So I'm going to turn the time over to you to tell us a little bit about your story of recovery and then how you got into doing the podcast.
Okay. All right. Well, I just want to, thank you very much. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to come on. I appreciate you asking me. It means a lot. This is the first, podcast that's ever asked me, to do an episode. And, we had a great conversation the other day, and I totally am inspired by what you're doing and, what you've done in the past with your work in terms of rehab. So my name is Marco Murillo. I'm a grateful recovering addict. March 3rd, God willing, I'll have 7 years clean.
That is so awesome. I am so in such admiration of you because that is a real feat. I mean, that is amazing, awesome, incredible, and inspiring to our listeners. 7 years is not a small thing because it's a daily work. It's one thing about recovery is it's not just, okay, I'm done. It's work for the rest of your life.
Yes, it is. I used cocaine for 19 years, and the last 6 years I used it was called a run. So I used every day for the last 6 years of my active addiction. I was born in Las Vegas, Nevada, and my parents were divorced when I was 5. My biological father moved to San Francisco, and I stayed in Las Vegas with my mother. And there was a couple summers that I had to go stay with my dad, and he was an alcoholic. He actually died in active addiction, and
there are millions of deaths every year because of addiction. And that not only affects that person, but the families.
Right. No.
And so you, at the time, how old were you?
When my father died?
Mm-hmm.
I was, let's see here. I was 40. Okay. Yeah, I was 40. So it was about 9 years ago. And so just to backtrack really quick. I didn't really know my father that much, but I look at the trauma that I actually had as a youth, and I'm not putting that on why I decided to use cocaine, but it was a coping mechanism. My dad used to beat me, and I didn't tell anybody that until I actually got clean. Well,
let me stop you there. In my work that I have worked with and I did my internship in 2 rehab centers. And I will say almost 99% of those that were in that rehab center had childhood trauma.
Yeah.
Of one sort or another, had childhood trauma. So that coping mechanism, that's what was their coping mechanism.
Sure.
So when people just say, oh, you can just stop, this is what you've been, for a very long time, has been your coping mechanism to survive.
Right. Yeah, and it's something to where, I started using, I was an athlete. I was a baseball player. So I started playing baseball when I was 3 years old, and when I was 20, I stopped playing, and I didn't use drugs during that time. I drank a little bit, but as soon as I stopped playing baseball, I went to a party, and I did cocaine, and I was off to the races. And for me, it was something to where I just pushed the trauma down, and I didn't tell anybody about it. And it festered. It sat there. And my disease grew. It's a progressive illness. And what happens is that you start using a substance. And I'm specifically speaking my story. So I started using cocaine, and it was every other couple of days or on the weekends, what have you. And it got to be to where I was a full-blown addict. Mm-hmm. And I was masking the pain and the trauma.
Yeah.
That's what I was doing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
That's okay.
So one thing that you mentioned is very common is that you stopped playing baseball, which for you was probably a defining thing for you.
Right.
Who you were was a baseball player.
Mm-hmm.
And then when that was gone, it was like, well, who am I now?
Right.
And I've seen that quite a bit in the people that I've worked with in recovery, is finding that purpose once we no longer have it. I had one gal who was a dancer, and then she stopped dancing, and it was like she was left in this, I don't know who I am now. That's what defined me. Mm. And so then you go with this childhood trauma, which she had as well, and it just is like builds upon each other. And so then to self-soothe, to find that peace, it's like, okay, I need an escape. I can't think about this. Is that?
No, yeah, you're exactly right. It's something to where, you've done something, you put all your energy and your love into something for so long, and then it abruptly stops. And the disease of addiction, my disease of addiction, is designed. It doesn't want to kill me fast. It's a slow, progressive disease. It wants to slowly see you deteriorate yourself.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. That's what happens. It lets you start. You start using. You gradually, you might move to other drugs or something like that. But you find that one thing to where you're just feeding it, and it builds. And it builds inside of you, and it takes control over your mind. And, people that don't have the disease of addiction, they're very easy to say, well, just stop. So easy. Yeah. Like, what's wrong with you? Like, why can't you just stop? And the fact of the matter is that how can you stop something that you have no control over? Because it's in the infant stage, and then it builds.
So, and there's a lot of controversy over this being called a disease and a choice.
Yeah.
And that's a huge controversy out there.
Right.
But I'm going to put it out there that there is a predisposition, a genetic predisposition for addiction.
Right.
And so if you have that gene,
right,
and maybe your siblings don't, but you might have that gene. Mm. So I tell kids, if that gene is in your, look in your genealogy, if that is in your past, in your grandparents, and be very careful with that, because don't even start, because you don't know if you've got that gene.
Right. Yeah. I definitely agree. I think it's something to where, like I mentioned earlier, my dad died in active addiction. His dad was also an addict.
Yeah. So we're looking at this genetics coming down. So, likely, hopefully, if you have kids, you're saying, hey, this is a genetic thing. Here's.
Yeah,
And I wish we would educate our kids more about that versus, oh, this is a choice, because if it's genetic, it's really hard it'd be like diabetes. Although a lot of people do not want to compare it to that. They don't believe that it is a disease such as diabetes, but it has often been compared to that. And if you are an addict, you know how it feels.
Right.
And it feels like that.
Yeah, I have a 21-year-old daughter named Camille and a 16-year-old son, Quinn. And, they're very much part of my life. I'm very fortunate that I have my children in my life. And, what I call it is break the cycle.
Yes.
And that's something to where, I can't control what my children do when they move out of the house. But I definitely, set an example to them in terms of what not to do. And when you get in a situation where you start experimenting with drugs, what happens to you? And, it's something to where I've broken that cycle where they don't have to go through what I went through.
Yeah.
They don't have to go through, the trauma. I've definitely put my children, through some hardship, but
I would imagine your wife as well.
Yeah, and you're exactly right, and my wife as well. And I'm fortunate enough to where my wife stayed, and she believed in that there was something that was more powerful that was controlling my mind, and that I needed help. And she didn't take the children and leave. And she's the rock of the family. She believed in me. She's very tough. She told me that I'm not eligible for relapse, that if I did relapse, that, I wouldn't see her or my children. I wouldn't have that opportunity. And that's something to me where it's a source of, it's a mindset. You have to change your mindset. Like, for me, what I've done is that I've learned that I don't want to go back to that life that I was living. And, it's very easy for the disease of addiction to manifest itself in different shapes or forms. You could stop using alcohol or drugs. But what happens is the disease will grow. The disease doesn't stop. It continues. And it manifests itself in porn, gambling, food, there's various outlets.
I'm really glad you mentioned a couple of things.
Okay.
One is the supportive family. What we've seen in research is that those who have the most success have the most support.
Okay, yeah.
So that's what research shows us. Hands down. What happens, though, is a lot of people go back into a bad situation. They don't have that support. So you are so fortunate to have that support of a loving wife who I'm sure has put up with a whole lot.
Yeah.
And she still stood by your side.
Yeah.
And so I have been to a lot of support groups because of my own family members who have been in active addiction for various different addictions. And those support groups, if I can put a plug in for family members, is so essential because you know how then to respond in a better way to your family member who is in active addiction. Right. Or who is in recovery even. Sure. You know how to respond in a better way than to walk away.
Yeah, because there's no manual for the family members of somebody that was in active addiction, and now that individual went to rehab, a detox, an intensive outpatient program. There's nothing that states, okay, well, here's what you need to do when they get out, and you just follow these steps, and everything's going to be fine. Yeah. It doesn't work like that. It's a whole process. My wife actually, when I got out of rehab, she started seeing a therapist because of the trauma that she went through that I put her through.
Yes.
So she has her own recovery.
Yes.
And I was in recovery. I'm starting recovery. I'm seeing an addiction therapist. She's in recovery from everything that I put her through, and she needs to understand how to navigate her life now in terms of, how am I going to, recover from that and then also be with this individual that now is quote unquote clean and trying to maintain this type of life. Recovery, an individual that gets sober, clean, and they're in recovery, it's a daily process. This is a life and death situation. Like, we were talking about earlier, numbers. I don't actually know the numbers. I really don't put an emphasis on like what the statistics are in terms of what make it or what don't. I think that there's, it's a rarity to have people that can stay sober or stay clean. There's a lot of relapse. I know that.
There's a lot of relapse. And we have talked about the rate of relapse being very high. Mm-hmm. That's part of the process. A lot of times that is part of someone's journey. You are very fortunate it's not part of your journey at this point. Well, understanding that could be part of your journey and it will make you stronger. I've seen that. But sometimes you are absolutely correct that relapse is life or death, because when you relapse, you a lot of times the addict will go back to as much as they were doing at the end, and it's too much
or more.
And then they're gone.
Yeah.
And so we see that the highest during the holiday season.
Okay.
So one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast was because if we can give some of our listeners today, both those in recovery, those who maybe want to recover, and the partners or family members, tips that they can have through the holidays to get them through. My podcast is on Life Change Solutions that can help them get through that time, this time of the holidays. There's so many triggers during the holidays.
Right.
And so that's one of the reasons. But I do want to hear, before we go into that, a little bit more about your story, a little more details on how you got into recovery. How did you get to that point?
Okay. So, I like I said, I was around 22 once I started using cocaine, and I've worked in the restaurant industry my whole life.
And that, by the way, is one of the biggest industries for addiction, substance abuse addiction, because you're in the restaurant industry and you're working long hours, and then usually you're up late and you go out with your
crew.
Workers after, and you stay up until, who knows, maybe all night, and you end up using, and then you sleep, and then you go do it again and again and again. It is one of the highest environments for addiction.
Right. Yeah. So I'm a chef by trade. Mm-hmm. So what happened was that I was in Las Vegas, and I was working at this hotel, and they offered me to go to New York and work for this very famous chef. And I ended up going to New York, and my disease grew even more in New York. And I was working at 3-4-star restaurants in Manhattan, and it was protocol. I had a couple of famous, very famous chefs, that would give us that it was fine to use drugs in the kitchen. And it was just a part of it. And, at the time I was young, I wanted to be this quote unquote famous chef. I wanted that persona. I thought it was cool. If I wasn't doing it, could I work at that? Would they allow me to work in the restaurant?
Yeah, so there was a little pressure, environmental pressure from that.
However, I made the choice. So nobody ever put a gun to my head. That's something that, like I said before in the beginning, my story, I don't cop out. Like, I went and bought the dope. Like, nobody forced me to do it.
Yeah.
So I just want to make that clear. So what happened was is that I met my wife, and she's also a chef as well. We opened a restaurant in Brooklyn, New York, and when I met her, she was 19 and I was 26. So she didn't know that I was in active addiction. She didn't know I was using cocaine. So for the first 10 years of us existing together in a relationship and then opening up a restaurant, I was in active addiction. And it just, for her, she was, in her family life and her friends, nobody would live this type of lifestyle. So she just thought like I had like sleep apnea. She thought I was a little crazy, but she was like, this is just who he is. It progressively got worse. It got worse to a point where we moved from New York to Florida, and this is how I got into rehab. So we were living in Jupiter, Florida, and I was a corporate executive chef for a corporate company in Miami. I was driving daily from Jupiter to Miami. Some days I might be up 3 days. Some days I might be up 5 days, no sleep. I'm getting drugs shipped to the headquarters of this corporate office in Miami. I'm getting cocaine shipped to my work.
Wow.
What happened was at the end, I drive home one day and I just crash. I milked all our money. We didn't have any money. I used all the money for cocaine. I haven't slept. So I go home and I sleep for like 2 days, and she comes in and she's like, "Okay, what's going on with you?"
Right.
Like, what is this serious? There's nothing. We have no money. You're sleeping for 48 hours.
And she has no clue.
No clue. She knew like I smoked like marijuana and I drank, but she had no clue that I was. And this is the disease of addiction. You're an addict. You're a master manipulator.
Right.
You're a great actor. You're a schemer. You're a scammer. I can sit down with you for 10, 15 minutes and you're giving me $50. You're doing, like that just to get that next one, to get that next one. So I look at her and I said, I'm addicted to cocaine.
Wow.
And she's like, what? I'm like, I have a serious problem. I remember she looked at me and she goes, okay. She leaves the room. I get up the next day. I have a bag packed. She goes, you're going to rehab. I'm like, okay, so mind you, I've used for 19 years. And then just all of a sudden, now I'm going to rehab.
Oh, she was serious. She wasn't playing around.
So she called a rehab. It was in West Palm Beach. And they said, listen, you need to get him here now because there's a window.
There is,
there,
yes.
Or he'll go. He'll
Yes.
leave. He'll flee. Excuse me. So I remember I said, okay, I had enough. So this is my rock bottom. I never have been to jail. I've never been to prison. I'm very fortunate. I never got any tickets. I never got busted or possession of anything. I didn't get bankrupt. She didn't leave me. I never was homeless. I just had enough. I wanted, the only way that I knew that I could stop using was I wanted to drive my car into the SunPass station. I wanted to kill myself.
Oh, wow.
That's the only way I knew, like, okay, I don't know how to stop, so I'm going to kill myself. I didn't do that, obviously, but that was the thinking. So I go to rehab. I remember she drives me. We go to the rehab, and I'm about to get out of the car, and I remember she puts her hand on my arm, and I thought she was going to say, babe, I love you. Good luck. You got this.
Yeah.
We're going to be here for you.
Yeah.
I'm your number one cheerleader. No, she doesn't say that. she says, she looks at me and she goes, you're not eligible for relapse. You relapse, you get out of this program, you relapse, you lose me, and you'll never see your children the rest of your life.
Wow,
And
she's
she
one
goes- and
strong lady.
And I looked at her and I was like, well, that's how it is. And I got out of the car and I shut the door. This is the defining moment. This is, on my podcast, I ask a lot of the guests what their defining moment was, where they had a moment. It might be a God moment. It might be a moment to where, like, they had enough, or they got sentenced to X amount of years in prison. So my 4th day in rehab, we're outside in the rehab where you could work out outside, and I'm working out with these all males, and there's this gentleman, an African American gentleman, walking towards me, and you can tell that he wasn't one of the patients. I'm a big sports fan, so he's walking, and all of a sudden, it's Vance Johnson. I don't know if you're familiar with Vance Johnson, and I would highly recommend your listeners to Google who Vance Johnson is. He is a pillar in the recovery community. Vance Johnson was a wide receiver for the Denver Broncos. He was a very famous football player. He was one of the three amigos. He played when John Elway was the quarterback of the Denver Broncos.
Okay.
And he's like, "Hey, Marco." And I'm looking at him and I'm like,
How do you know my name?
"Vance, how do you know my name? You know, I know who you are." He goes, Can I talk to you for a second?" And I was like, "Oh, okay, sure, yeah." And we go and we sit down. And he goes, "You know, I heard that you have a wife and kids." And I was like, "Yeah." "How do you know that?" He goes, "Listen, do you mind if I talk to you? And I'll tell you, I want to tell you something." I said, "Sure." And so he puts his hand on my shoulder. And he goes, "Do you believe in God?" And I grew up Catholic, and I'm like, at this point in my life, I don't know what to believe.
Right.
And I said, "I don't know, to be honest with you." He goes, "Well, you have this kingdom, and you're the king, and you have a queen, and you have these seeds." And he says, "And you know what you're letting the disease of addiction do?" And I said, "No, I have no idea." He goes, "The disease of addiction is the devil. And it's taking your wife and killing her, killing your seeds, and slaughtering your whole kingdom." He goes, "That's what you're letting happen." He goes, "You have no idea what you've done to them. You have no idea the ramifications of your actions and what is going to happen if you don't stop using drugs." And it was something to where I really didn't. I never looked at her side or the kid's side. And you
Right.
think I would, because my dad was in active addiction. My dad was a drug addict.
Well, one thing to make clear about addiction is that you can't think of them when you're in active
True.
addiction.
You're
You
right.
only think about getting your next hit,
Yeah,
your
you're right.
next.
You're right.
So you were not in a place where you could. You now were in that place, and you had this someone there that was,
No,
say it a God thing, say it whatever.
it was an intervention. I had an intervention, like, I had an intervention in rehab.
Yeah.
So, because the days leading up to him talking to me, I had a plan that I was going to escape rehab.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
I already had a plan, because we used to go to this gym outside of the rehab in a bus, and I was just going to get out where we would work out and escape and hop the fence, because I didn't believe in any of, like, what these people were talking about. So after that conversation, we exchanged numbers, and he said, I'm gonna keep in touch with you." I said, "Okay." And I said, I think maybe he's on to something. And what happens is that in the rehab, they have a thing called H&I, which is hospitals and institutions. And they bring meetings in the rehabs,
Okay.
in the facilities.
Okay.
So they had a program called Narcotics Anonymous, NA. And they had a meeting maybe the next day, that night. And somebody told me, like, hey, Marco, you should, let's go check out this meeting, Narcotics Anonymous. I was like, what the hell is Narcotics Anonymous? No, man, you'll like it. You'll. I'm like, is it like Alcoholics Anonymous? Yeah, but it's a little different. I'm like, all right, yeah, I'll check it out. I didn't want to go. I go there. I was very reluctant. I sit down. There's these two guys that one is the chairperson. He chairs the meeting, and the individual next to him is his speaker. They both had 2 to 5 years clean, and they went to this rehab. And mind you, Vance also went to the rehab that I was at.
Okay.
So he actually was doing a service for the rehab. So I'm at this meeting. I sit down, and they start reading off these little, who is an addict? We do recover. The 12 steps of Narcotics Anonymous. The 12 traditions of Narcotics Anonymous. They read a book, a little one, passage called Just for Today on that particular day. Then the individual, the speaker, he shares his story for about 20 minutes. And I swear to God, Kendra, everything that this man said, it's like I thought he was talking about me. And I was like, wait, I did that. I used to do that to people. I used to use that amount. I did this. I did that. And it was another eye-opening moment in rehab. So after the meeting, I immediately went up to the table and I said, hey, look, where do I find out more about this Narcotics Anonymous? And one of the speaker, he gave me his blue book. And he goes, dude, you got to read this. This saved my life. And I read that book in 2 days, and I'm not a reader.
Yeah.
I read the book in 2 days. I got out of the 30-day program. I went to a 3-month, it's called IOP, Intensive Outpatient Program. Mind you, I got fired from that job in Miami. So I had no job. In Narcotics Anonymous, they suggest that you do 90 meetings in 90 days. I got out of rehab. I did 270 meetings in 90 days.
Oh, wow.
Because the fact of the matter is you have to understand, for 19 years, I used cocaine. So then all of a sudden, 31 days later, I'm out in society.
And that's what we find why there's such a huge relapse is
Correct.
Because there's not that support. But that shows such determination on your part to do that. That's very rare. We don't see that
Right.
in recovery.
No, yeah, I appreciate
So
that. Right.
that was hard work on your part. And you had to do that, I think, in order to, that's the kind
it
of.
was a must. Yeah,
Yes.
it was a must.
Now, not everyone has to take that same road, but for you, that was the path for you.
Yeah. And like I said, this is my story. This is my journey. This is something to where, if whoever is watching or listening, there's many ways and means to go about the individual journey and recovery. But, I just want to preface this that in the beginning, you have to want to surrender. You have to be at a point where you said, look, I've had enough. I can't go on in life anymore like this. It's not something where you can have a reservation in your mind and say, you know what, maybe I'll try this. I don't know. But if it doesn't work, I can always go back to using. It doesn't work like that.
No.
It doesn't work like that. And for me, I had to make the choice in rehab to say, okay, I'm going to do this because I'm tired. I can't live for 19 years this life. Like, the only way I knew how to stop was to try to kill myself. But then all of a sudden, you have this program called Narcotics Anonymous. I do the 270 meetings in 90 days. I get a sponsor, okay? I actually talk to this man that I have build this relationship with, talking to him daily, I start to work the steps. And I also have an addiction therapist as well. The addiction therapist and my sponsor are the first two people I ever told about my dad beating me.
Yeah.
So I released that trauma to them. So now I'm clean. I'm actually talking about the trauma, and I'm working to be a productive member of society. I'm working to change the mindset that, okay, I have this disease of addiction, but if I follow these suggestions and I follow what these individuals that have time, clean time, how do they do it? And take their suggestions. And what you do is when you go to meetings and you hear people share, something might resonate with you, and you take that and you build it, and you build, it's like you're sharpening you're sharpening the sword. You're taking this information and their tools, and you use the tools for your own recovery. Hey, I heard this. This guy was in this situation, or this female was in this situation. They did this, and they stayed clean, one day at a time.
Yes.
And that's what I'm going to do.
Yes. So, and you're doing it. And not only that, you're doing it and you're helping others. There's a couple of things you mentioned that I want to reiterate. One is mindset. I talk a lot about mindset in my book, Life Change Solutions, which I have right here.
Right.
And you will get a copy at the end.
Oh, thank you.
So I talk a lot about any change that we make, we have to have a mindset change first. Right. It's really got to be here. That's where we get that mind-body connection. I do groups called the mind-body medicine groups.
Okay.
And the other thing that you mentioned is that support and the groups that you are in. One person may say something in that group that just clicks with you.
Right.
So, and I love that you have a therapist, and I love you got a sponsor, because those are huge steps. Having someone that you can call at an instant, anytime, right. Because there are times when you're going to be triggered and you're going to be like, okay, I need to talk to somebody.
Right.
And so letting our listeners know that those are really important things. Having a sponsor, having a therapist, and groups.
And meetings, right.
Are meetings where there's groups and those people share, and their stories give you ideas and may touch you and may just save your life because you heard that story. Oh, they did this. I can do this too.
Right. Yeah.
So I love that. And now what I'd like you to talk about is, how did you start the podcast? Because it's an awesome podcast of people sharing stories, and you've had some pretty impressive people on your podcast as well.
I'm very fortunate. How did I start the podcast? What happened was that about 4 months ago, I was sitting in Longport, New Jersey, and I'm a private chef, so my client also has a house there, and I'm looking over the ocean, and I had this moment of clarity to where I said, God, I'm so fortunate. Like, look where I'm at. Like, I'm not in prison. I should be dead. I should not have this opportunity, but I'm not like giving back. Like, we keep what we have by giving it away. And I want a platform to where, all these individuals and all these people I've met that can come in and share their story. And it was like, let's try a podcast. And I was like, okay. And I was fortunate enough to have somebody, I shared the vision with them, and they said yes, and we're off and running. So that's the story.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, our time is almost up, but before we end,
sure,
I would like you to tell our listeners today, since it's the holidays,
right?
Maybe do you have some tips for them?
Yeah,
during the holidays that can help them through this challenging time, because it can be challenging through the holidays.
Yeah, you're right.
So what would you tell our listeners to give them hope, health, and happiness and through the holidays, and maybe some tips?
I would say that, one of the main things for me is people, places, and things. If you know that you are not comfortable in a holiday party, a work party, or even friends and family, if there's alcohol, or if you're not comfortable with that environment or that situation, be open. Let people know. Maybe go there early, have dinner, and then leave before all the drinking starts or
That's
something
a really
like that.
good tip. I like that one.
Go to more meetings. There's a lot more meetings that are available during the holidays. Check it out. You can go to aa.org, na.org. Reach out to your support system more. If you're in recovery, you definitely should have, a group of people, like-minded individuals that you should, be open. Say, hey, look, this is a trigger, man. Like I remember every Christmas, I was always high. I was there physically, but not there mentally. Call somebody, be open, communicate. Yeah, that's basically, what I would.
Those
I
are
would
three
suggest.
really good tips.
Okay.
I like that a lot. Now, before we leave, what
Okay.
can you tell our listeners about recovery and hope, health, and happiness? How's it given you that? And how can it give them that?
So I think that, the number one thing for me in terms of recovery with hope, health, and happiness is that you have to give yourself a break. You can't live with your past mistakes. If you don't give yourself a break and you dwell on the past, the present day, your present day self, there is no hope. You're not going to be healthy. You're not going to be happy. Like you have to say, hey, look, that was me then. And I don't really care what people are saying about, what I was like. It's changed for the better. And, no pun intended, but by all means necessary, do what you want to do for yourself. Because you take care of yourself, your recovery comes first, everything else will show up.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Thanks.
That is great advice to our listeners, is to don't dwell in the past. And I talk a lot about that when we ruminate in the past, we stay in the past.
Of course. Yeah. And that's what it's designed.
Yeah.
It's designed. The disease of addiction is designed to always come like a snake, to always come sideways. When things are good, that voice, I call it the voice will say, hey, Marco, do you remember when you were like this? Or do you remember that one Christmas where you forgot all the gifts and it's Christmas time?
How do you change that?
Well, you have to, what you have to do is you have to love the part. And this is what, my addiction therapist has actually taught me, that you have to love that inner kid in you, because that's the trauma. That's where when you were traumatized at whatever certain age, you have to love that about you. You can't fight every single day in recovery, because what happens to fighters? They're going to lose. Not every fighter, at some point, not every fighter is undefeated. So you have to have more spirituality. You really have to look at it like, hey, look, I'm going to look at this like, okay, let me talk about that. Let me call my sponsor and say, listen, the voice is going crazy right now, but I'm putting it out there, and then you might get it. You probably will get a suggestion that's going to help you, and you use that, and then you move forward, and it's a loss, but you've learned from it. So now you're clean another day. It might be one day at a time. It might be 1 second at a time. Sometimes it's 1 hour, one night at a time, but that's how it is. It's a daily journey.
Yes, it is. And you have done that.
I'm trying.
And
I'm definitely trying.
Inspired me today.
Thank you.
And you've inspired, I think, our guests.
Well, thank you very much.
To have that hope and to not stay in the past, and to know that today the present is a present. It is a gift. This holiday season, when we talk about gifts, you're giving yourself the present of being present.
Yeah, alive, free.
So, and just if it's 1 second at a time, 1 minute at a time, 1 day at a time. So thank you, Marco, for being on our podcast.
Thank you. I'm very grateful for the opportunity. I hope that, somebody, that is, maybe in active addiction, or they're in recovery and they're having some issues or some questions or problems, that's something, or a family member, anybody that heard something on the podcast, it'll help them. Like that's the most important thing.
Well, I certainly think it will. And I also want to put a plug in for your podcast because you have a lot more stories that they can turn to during this holiday season as well. Your podcast is called By All Means Necessary, and it's Marco Murillo.
Correct.
And they can find it on any of the podcasts, on Apple, on Spotify, on Google.
And the YouTube channel is called By All Means Necessary Podcast.
And you have a YouTube channel.
Yeah, we do.
Awesome. So YouTube channel. I will put all of that in my notes.
Thank you.
And then also you can find me at My Life Change Solutions.
Right.
And on the YouTube as well. I have a YouTube channel. And then also check out my Instagram and my I have a Facebook page that people can write comments. And I would love for you to write a comment about our episode today. And if you have someone that you know is in active addiction or someone who's in recovery that you think will benefit from this, please share it with them, especially during this holiday season. Let's save lives during this season, and let's bring inspiration and hope and happiness and health to everyone. And thank you again.
Thank you.
This has been an episode of Life Change Solutions.
Cool.
And we will definitely, hopefully, meet again and do some more podcasts. So thank you.
I really appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Thanks,